Yep. We're there. Well, welcome everyone. Tēnā koutou katoa, ngā mihi mahana kia koutou. Welcome to this meeting of the Safety and Resilience Committee. Most of us are in the room. There's a couple of councillors still to return, and I see online we have Councillor Gary Tiwaha. So welcome, Gary.
Afternoon.
There we go. Now, I believe, Councillor, we are open the morning's proceedings with a karakia, so we'll continue under that one, and we'll close off with a karakia at the end of the day. I don't believe we've received any apologies. No. Good. This means we're all here. And we haven't had notification of a public forum. The agenda is as notified. Not proposing any changes to the agenda, unless anyone else has some good suggestions. No, we've got the agenda as it is. The declaration of interests, of course, are up online, and councillors will notify us if there are any changes to that. Okay, we'll move on then to the confirmation of the minutes of the meeting of the 10th of May, which have been circulated. Are there any comments on those? Thank you. Moved Andrew. Councillor Noon, seconded Councillor Wilson. Thank you very much. All in favour? Aye. Against? Right, approved. Thank you very much. We'll move on to open actions from the last meeting. I don't think there are any, so that's easy. So we're up to our first paper, 8.1, which is the South Dunedin Future Programme. It looks as though we're welcoming Dr. Gavin Palmer and Jonathan Rowe and Jean-Luc Ryan up to the front. Thank you very much. Well, we know the South Dunedin Future Programme is an extremely important thing for people who live there in wider Dunedin and the country. There's a great deal of time and effort has been put into the community engagement, and clearly that time and effort is paying off in many ways. And this paper has included a lot of information on what has happened in the past and what is coming soon. So look, I'm happy to hand over to the panel. You can talk to us to present that, and then we'll open the meeting up for questions. So over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I might just make a couple of framing comments and then take the paper as read and invite questions. I guess, in short, it's been about 12 months since I was last here presenting. So in July 2022, we came in and presented the program plan, which was essentially kind of what do we think we're going to do, or what do we need to do over the next sort of 4 or 5 years to come up with a plan for climate adaptation in South Dunedin. In the 12 months intervening, we've basically been looking at thinking, how do we deliver that? How do we turn what we said was a plan into some action? And that's kind of what the focus has been for 12 months. It's not been easy because a lot of that we had to figure out as we went. But I think we're really pleased with where we were at. There's been a lot of hard work gone into procurement and back office processes. And we're at the point now where the program is going to shift gears, I think. So in the past, I've heard commentary, there's a lot of kind of talk, a lot of conversation about things, and we're about to, I think, move into an action phase where a lot of the program is going to start producing a lot of products. There's going to be a lot of activity with consultants and with engagement with the community, and also coming back to councillors for decisions. So that's all going to, I would expect people to see the pace pick up, and we're going to be coming back here much more regularly. So we're really excited about that and looking forward to it, but it is going to mean a bit more going on. So against that sort of backdrop, happy to take the paper as read and answer questions.
I wonder, thanks, Jonathan. I wonder if you could just outline for us, you said there's a whole lot of things and outlooks and not coming. Just outline briefly for us all, as briefly as you can, what those are going to be, that we're seeing new things coming.
Sure. So basically, one of the places that I think everyone wants to get to is what could this look like? So that's really the big product there is we're hoping to, in December, deliver a long list of adaptation options. So that's on that spectrum of fight and flight. What could we do? And there's a number of things that we're going to do kind of that lead into that in terms of sort of a desktop review of what all that could look like, and then starting to kind of work that up into a long list that we'll present to councillors. And then in the new year, the intention is to consult that with the community. The other big bit is that in July last year, we signed off for an interim sort of strategic intent. So kind of our working goalposts. We want to come back in October and reconfirm or refine those. So we need to have some substantive conversations with Mana Whenua, sort of play back to the community what we think we've heard from them in the last 4 or 5 years and kind of sense check back. And also since July last year, the government has released the National Adaptation Plan. So we want to make sure that that national guidance and structure is also reflected in what we're doing locally. So they're the two kind of big touch points with council in terms of the options long list and that kind of update of the strategic direction, if you like. And then amongst that, there's an enormous amount of sort of on the ground practical engagement with consultants, contractors, with a whole lot of technical agencies and a whole lot of conversations with the community as well.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll open that up to questions from councillors. Councillor Wilson to start.
Good, thank you. I'm really impressed with your graphics, and I think you've spent a lot of time on comms and engagement, which is really important. Maybe I've missed it, but I didn't get an idea of how effective that has been in responses. And I'm just wondering, I mean, you can spend a lot of money in this stuff and it looks really good, and I congratulate you on that. Has it engaged people more to date?
I think early days on that. Our sort of anecdotal experience, I think, would be that it has, and that it is. So, for example, that introductory flyer that was in the pack, we launched that at South Dunedin Street Festival on 1 April and had a couple of hundred people come in and talk to us about the boards, throw sticky notes up on the big map of South D that's included in the poster. We're establishing a kind of brand, a look and feel, distilling down the concepts. Obviously kind of moving from describing this as super complex and long-term and complicated into a space where we can, in quite a short, pithy way, describe to someone on the street what we're doing and what it looks like. The general sense is that's having real cut through. We have one of the work streams of the consultants that we brought on board is comms and engagement. So we're now going to kick the tires on a lot of that, and we'll be collecting metrics for that. So hopefully in the coming months, I can sort of start to give you specific numbers.
Can I just ask one other question? It's about your timeframes, which your final implementation plan for December 2026, which sounds in some ways really soon, but appreciating it's an adaptation plan that doesn't finish then. It's the creation of the plan. But when that's put up there in the way it's here, are people thinking that they can get their heads around these issues that quickly?
I think that's the intent, and obviously we'll need to be nimble and adapt to that. If we go out and particular issues are harder to transact or more controversial, or we just need to interrogate it a bit more, we'll have to have a think about rejigging that and come back and have conversations with councillors about that. But we've also sort of made commitments to the community and other stakeholders, and I think there's a sense that
They want to know.
you know, people want to see it move forward, and momentum matters. So I think at the same time, you know, you could always sit here and analyse and overanalyse, and we could take forever. But so at this stage, the plan is to do as good a job as we can possibly do in the timeframes set. If it looks like we're going to have to compromise quality too much, we might relook at the timeframes.
Yeah, I probably should have asked that question in the reverse, because I suppose if you think you've got 80% with you, you'd think you're doing pretty well, I presume, and making a quicker response. I mean, as ambitious a response.
Yeah. I mean, we've obviously got a number of different phases and a lot of different steps. If we find that things are moving faster or the conversations are progressing similarly, you know, we can knock out a phase if appropriate.
All right, well done. It's like the translation and the graphics has been brilliant.
And I just note that I think, you know, that does sound like an ambitious time frame to get things done by 2026. But I think the point is we're not just starting now. You've already all had that time building up relationships and engagement with groups, and it can build on that. So thank you. Councillor Metham and then Councillor Scott. Questions?
Yeah, Jonathan, just noticed there's a lot of sort of townhouses and things being built at South Dunedin at the moment. There's the issue around the Forbury Park sale. How has this future plan, how's it influencing decisions that are being made today?
So obviously it's a complex system. There's a lot of there's district plans and other layers that influence all those types of decisions. To change that system, you really need information and evidence. And I guess that's one way of looking at this program, is that we're intending over the coming kind of 2 or 3 years to produce a whole lot of technical information, a whole lot of sort of social and community information, and pull all that together that will inform all of our colleagues across the different councils that manage all of these different instruments that control kind of planning and consenting and other things. But that's quite a big beast. So it will take some time to turn around. And in the interim, there is obviously a risk that decisions are made while we're going through that work that we may look back on in the future and think maybe they weren't the best ones. We're certainly having these types of discussions with colleagues working in those spaces, and but it's a risk that we need to be aware of and manage.
Can I just provide one practical example of what we have done? We engaged in an appeal on the 2GP that was concerned with how this was built in South Dunedin on the basis that this process was ongoing and it was presumptuous to allow a particular type of development, and with the DCC and us, we successfully resolved that appeal, was withdrawn, so that that action didn't happen. Not to say it was the wrong thing, just that the timing was out. And so we do, as Jonathan said, we do continuously engage with organisations and use the levers that we do have, and that was one that we were able to successfully resolve, knowing that this work was happening.
Thank you. Thanks. Brian.
Yeah, cool. I've got 2 questions, and one of them follows on from Tim's. I was going to ask the same question, but specifically on Forbury Park, because I think the reply was that we may miss out on opportunities as we're dotting the I's and crossing the T's. But it just, like as a councillor, it's just hard to know how to actually get to the front line of that conversation, because I mean there are various precautionary strategies that you could put in place. And I'm not talking about social housing. It's in a unique location. It's relatively low on the vertical. It's close to the sea. There's landfill issues not too far away. I'm really uncomfortable that the conversations and opportunities around Forbury Park are not more front of mind, for this council and other councils. Can you reply to that?
I guess a framing comment would be, as we saw in the ODT last week, the sale of Forbury is currently sort of involved in a court process. I'll refrain from making too many public statements on it, but in general, large strategic sites in South Dunedin that could have a long-term benefit for flood mitigation, for housing supply, for a whole range of sort of council services and infrastructure are really important, and we should absolutely be looking at them as big opportunities.
Exactly.
And one of the things, again, that the program is going to try and do, will do in the coming sort of 2 or 3 years, is start to define some of that. So where are the big opportunities? What do they look like? Where are the biggest risks? And how does that change over time? So that, in a world with limited resources, if we can move in some places and not others, we can kind of direct council efforts and attention in particular ways. But it's certainly an issue that I'm following closely.
I know we're all following it closely. I'm talking about, some constructive and precautionary action. And we've been talking about South Dunedin for a long time, but we, forever, to a certain degree, kicking the can down the road. here it is, here's an opportunity. But I'm not dismissing what's going on. What I see is some really constructive work. So please don't let me say anything negative, but at the same time, there's an opportunity. Anyway, I've made a point. Through the chair, my second question, if I may.
Well, just my very, Dr. Palmer, would you like to respond to some of that?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. It was just a reminder that in August 2021, Harness Racing New Zealand invited public submissions on the future of Forbury Park.
So which reason is it?
That's correct. And so you made a submission on that went into that process. And then that process hasn't had anything come back in terms of that decision making. So that's sort of where that sits at the moment. But you did make a submission, you expressed an opinion on the opportunities that the situation presents.
Yes.
And then we're just waiting for the feedback on the future. But as soon as we know anything about that, we'll definitely update you, and then you can make some decisions about next steps.
Cool. Thank you very much. And my second question, if I may, is just what have we learned in terms of what's currently going on in Hawke's Bay? I haven't got it in front of me here, but you in this report, you talk about if there was land use change over 100 years, that you have number 65. Yeah, what was that? 65 properties.
A year, 6,500 properties,
Yeah, yeah.
paragraph 37.
And there's financial implications with all of that, you know, from whatever happens to the properties, you know, whether they still land up as homes on a different design footing, or whether they turn into wetlands, or whatever they sort of turn into. But you've nevertheless, in this report, you've referred to that. I think what's happened in Hawke's Bay, from memory, isn't it something where there's been an agreement to buy a certain amount of land, and that has been negotiated that 50% of that cost will be central government and 50% with local government? Correct me if I'm wrong on that one.
My understanding is it's sort of under discussion, and there's various kind of approaches that have been floated.
Yeah. Anyway, my question is in that, because once, you know, standards or expectations are set through a negotiation, no doubt will become a benchmark for here. So you're keeping abreast of that and those sort of opportunities. I always sort of wonder in those negotiations where the actual landowner stands, how much they're chipping up. But in terms of the 65 properties over 100 years, have you got any comment just in terms of the financials and the processes around that?
Sure. So I guess one of the initial comments would be what's happened up north, sort of in Auckland with the anniversary floods and then Cyclone Gabrielle and on the East Cape and coast. You know, they're looking at a kind of post-disaster scenario where they've got all of these properties, all of these houses that in many respects have got silt up to the gutters and maybe have zero economic value. And they're needing to make decisions about, you know, will we or will we not let people rebuild? And if so, if not, you know, who buys them out, how, under what circumstances?
Yeah.
So there's a whole kind of piece there, which we are factoring in the South E context, but also the kind of big lesson there is get ahead of this.
Yes.
Ideally, you don't want to be doing it post-event. So how do we establish some sort of process or where we can figure out where are the areas most at risk, most likely to face an event like that? How do you sort of get ahead of that and incrementally both sort of protect it from the worst effects, sort of prevent, start to move people out of harm's way? And why I mention that in the paper is because this program, the South Indian Future Program, is going to do this technical work for 3 years, produce this kind of plan or a strategy, but then there's going to be a conversation on how do you implement that?
Yeah.
And what does that look like? So rather than getting to sort of 2026 and thinking, right now we better start thinking about how do we implement, we started thinking about that now. And if you think that no matter what the South Indian Future Program comes up with, whether that's whatever mix of, you know, protection, accommodating retreats, avoiding or retreat, it's going to likely require some form of land use change. And then we're starting to kind of quantify what would that look like. And 65 properties is, 1% of land use in South Sea per year on year for 100 years. It's quite a big undertaking, even if you did it over 100 years. So we just started to look at what are the options for doing that? How could you do it proactively? How does that compare to, post-event? What are the pros and cons? What are the costs? But it's really early days. And the point in putting it in the paper was that we've sort of committed to being really open and transparent about this, really tricky conversations. But we want people to know what we're thinking about, what we're working on as we do it, sort of before we have the answers. Which is a long-winded way of saying I don't have the answers on that yet.
No, but at least you're talking about it and thinking about it, and that's really good.
And it might be where this goes is some sort of pilot, where we say, if we can test this in a particular way or a particular period, and then you get some really good data and say, well, look, it had this financial impact, these social impacts, and you compare that to some of what's happened up north, it might be that we say, yeah, this is absolutely the way to go. Or it might be, it turns out that the juice ain't worth the squeeze, and actually we should just kind of keep doing what we're doing. But they are all the ideas that we're exploring.
Thank you, Jonathan, very much. Look, we've got Councillor Noon, then Councillor Weir, then Councillor Malcolm. Andrew.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I've got a question for Anita, and then I've got a question for you, Jonathan. But the process we're running in at the moment, that the city and the regional council are running as a local government process, and you referred to the 2GP, which is an RMA process. So just following on from my good friend on my left, comment about why are we sort of making a bit more traction in terms of the future of South Dunedin. I think it's important to remember, there's a question, Anita, it's important to remember that there are property rights that exist out there simply through a legally established district plan. And as you said, 2GP, etc. So whatever the conclusion of this, would it then require a variation if the city was of a mind to change the district plan to enhance the future of South Dunedin, whatever that means, they would go through a variation process to their district plan. Is that right or wrong?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. So my question for Jonathan, I see in paragraphs, I think it was 31, 32, we talk about the stages after you've got some technical scientific advice that you've just issued a contract for. And I note that you probably know what I'm going to say now, the GNS isn't included in that group of experts. Do they fit into that next category in terms of peer reviewing, or are they still involved, excuse me, in the process in some way, shape or form? Or is that pretty much an ORC independent of this joint project going forward?
Yes, I might make a couple of comments and I might invite Sean to speak about the detail. So on the that A3 attachment, the overview, which I think has been printed on my paper in A4, it talks about 5 work streams. One of those, the natural hazards one, is ORC led for obvious reasons, and the other 4 made up the tender that went out recently. That's what the consultant team has come on board to do. The reason we did that in part was because ORC has a whole range of existing work programs in the space, some of which are outlined in the report, existing relationships with GNS and NIWA and others. So, kind of wasn't broke, so we didn't need to fix it. But we didn't have the capabilities on board or the arrangements in place to do the rest of the work, which is why we did that tender. Stepping back from that, we are managing it as one big piece, one program. So, for example, we did a big onboarding last week, involved DCC, ORC staff, Okaha as well. So while there's separate contracting arrangements, it's all being managed as one big piece. But maybe you can
just clarify, sorry, John. So obviously if Gavin or somebody would have sat on that contract assessment process, so there's obviously a clear collaboration in issuing that contract. Is that?
Yep. So the contracting mechanism is through DCC, just for administrative purposes. But Sean-Luc was on the evaluation panel with me and 3 others, and then sort of all of that process was stepped through the joint steering group, which comprises Anita, Gavin, and 2 of the GMs from DCC.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, Andrew?
John Luke, I think was going to.
Oh, right,
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah, so just a comment on GNS. So we are part of that work stream 5 that Jonathan was talking about, the natural hazard one. We are working with GNS currently on updating the groundwater information we have and modeling based on the additional bores that were installed in the Southern Indian area in the last 3-4 years. So that's an example of work we're doing currently with GNS. And in the past, we've done a lot of collaboration with GNS mainly on the geological side of Southern Indian and the groundwater. And we've got that continuing involvement of GNS as required. The other contribution was through the New Zealand Sea Rise program. And that was, I think, completed last year. The purpose was to provide detailed sea level rise and including ground movement, and that was a collaboration between GNS, University of Victoria, and NIWA, and we were also involved in that.
I would also add that ORC's contracting of GNS science extends outside what we call South Dunedin. It includes what we call Harbourside, so it goes right round the right round to the stadium, and we're looking to bring a report to you on the findings of that, the relationship between groundwater and sea level. Later this calendar year.
Thank you very much. Councillor Weir.
Yeah, my question's similar to one of Andrew's about sort of changing district plans and stuff. I'm wondering if there's any, I'm just sort of reflecting on of the fact that we've got the SDF and the FDS and the acronyms reflect one another, but do the plans as they currently stand and as we go forward with the FDS, the Future Dunedin Strategy, is there consideration or carve outs or something that can be made in that, to your knowledge, for whatever outcomes the South Dunedin Future Program gets? For example, you know, if we were to go to full retreat, obviously you're going to need a lot more houses elsewhere in the city with stuff like that.
Sure. The Future Development Strategy has a 30-year focus. The South Dunedin Future Program is a slightly longer, so it includes the next 30 years, but also kind of out for 100, so slightly different timescales. Also, the FDS work is kind of driven by statutory timeframes. So I think they have to have a product sort of more or less draft by September and finalised early next year. We're obviously a slower, well, a longer time frame. So we are absolutely collaborating on that. We obviously won't have firm decisions or direction or strategy on South D in that time frame. However, we are planning to have a number of interim products like a first stage risk assessment, a whole lot of community engagement work, that sort of some natural hazards information that we will feed into the process. And that probably speaks to a broader piece around over the next 3 years, the adaptation strategy is the sort of final product, but we'll be producing a whole lot of interim products during the course of that period that we would anticipate would inform long-term strategic planning processes, annual planning processes and the like. So people can be making decisions all the way through. They don't need to be waiting until 2026.
I'll just provide 2 additional pieces of information. So the FDS itself doesn't produce any rules that might direct the district then to do particular things. But the other thing just to factor into all of that is we are assuming, excuse me, FDSs will be subsumed into the new legislation as regional spatial strategies. So while we might just have one iteration of an FDS under the RMA, the same concept in terms of where to reside and why and where to get businesses and all that will occur under the regional spatial strategy and the Spatial Planning Act. So it will be an ongoing conversation, and that enables us to ensure that we build the South Dunedin Futures, any actions that we need in an RMA space into that process as we go through.
Thank you. Thanks. Councillor Malcolm.
Yeah, look, I'm just going back to paragraph 37 about the 6,500 properties. So you're saying 65 houses per year over a 100-year period. I can understand what you're saying there, but isn't the analogy, should that analogy or that formula not be set on the level above the sea? Simply because your inundation isn't going to happen. It's going to happen on the level, and South Dunedin's basically flat, so the inundation, I know there's ups and downs, but the inundation will be at certain levels. So at any different point in time, depending on the sea level rise, you may have, one year you might have 65 houses, but the next year you could have 3,000 houses because they're at that next level of sea rise. So, I mean, to truly reflect what would actually happen there with sea level rise, that doesn't sort of, in my opinion, doesn't go anywhere near that. So,
No, you're right. And that example is kind of incremental, kind of linear line, right? Out for 100 years.
Yeah.
Real world, it's not going to happen like that. There'd be peaks and troughs and plateaus. I guess what it's intending to illustrate is the sort of quantum of change that could be required, knowing that that will be probably quite lumpy. But that's what one of the things we're looking at is that irrespective of how lumpy it was, or how many troughs, if you try to get ahead of that, and it might be if nothing happens for 5 years, you get quite a long way ahead of that. But then you have a big event or a tipping point where a particular level of sea level rise has a big impact on groundwater, for example, and that has a big impact on a larger area. That if you're not getting ahead of it, all of a sudden, in a very short space of time, you're having to look at major responses or investment or land use change in a very large area. So I wouldn't read too much into the figures other than the other quantums that might be required. We could absolutely do that in one big bang if we had to, though we're also looking at what if you did it over a long period of time, got ahead of the ball. If that makes sense.
yeah, it does, but then it doesn't, because it actually doesn't at any particular, like if we go at the current rate of sea level rise, and if we end up at 300 mils and that actually affects 3,000 houses, well, we should have moved by then. So, to get ahead of the game, your 65 may not be anywhere near where it should be. So I'm just trying to, I think if we're going to be perfectly transparent with what's happening and sea level rise is occurring, we need to be saying that at that level, there are going to be X number of houses in South Dunedin inundated or severely affected. So I just think that, I'm really I'm happy with what you do. I'm just saying, and that I just want reality, really. And I think reality is going to be, that might be tough. And that's a really good way of trying to get ahead of the game. I understand, but getting ahead of the game may have to be quicker.
I think these are just illustrating a concept.
Yeah,
absolutely agree that this program will give that spatial, temporal specificity around which bits are impacted sooner and how many properties are affected.
Right.
And ideally, in a perfect world, you'll be matching any kind of, if that happened to be an option, you'd be matching it in a just-in-time kind of fashion, but in practice, it would be a whole bunch of factors that would affect implementation, so the timings would not be identical. But it's just to illustrate a concept.
Cool. So by your South Dunedin in 2026, when you're going to present the final strategy, that will have those type of figures in there at that stage.
One of the things we would anticipate it having is, what does that risk scope look like? So sea level rise, impact on groundwater, rainfall and light. What is that risk scope now and how does that change over time? And you're right in terms of it might go up very incrementally and then hit a threshold, and all of a sudden there's 3,000 houses that are at risk. So that will then trigger conversations around, okay, well, our response options or adaptation options, we might want to start doing some of those now and do them really incrementally. And that might be strategic acquisition of properties in areas that aren't high risk now, but in 30 years' time, we know are going to be, for example. Or it might be that there's other alternatives around, okay, we'll plan for building a large piece of infrastructure in that place in 20 years' time, and that smooths the curve. So the strategy will articulate some of that, but kind of the implementation of it, that's where you get into the district plan, into the kind of long-term plan processes, the different operational groups.
Because at some stage we need the reality that when it gets to that level, experience from building out in South Dunedin, where I know the property that we built still doesn't flood, but the houses around it are flooding, and we decided when we built out there that it was up at a higher level. Simply because of old historic. So,
Yeah,
that's what I'm trying to say. I think the reality check is if 3,000 houses are going to hit when it gets to 300, we need to have that shown.
And that's what the ORC technical work will ground truth a lot of that for us. The risk assessment will kind of quantify it for us, what's actually happening and when. And then we'll move on from the kind of really simple model to a much more sophisticated. Yeah.
Good. Thank you.
So that's coming, Kevin.
Yeah, that's cool. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thanks. Any further questions from councillors? No, look, yes, Tim.
Just want to, Richard, really, Richard, in our long-term plan, in the work we've been doing with exec, are we including the South Dunedin program within that? Is there anything that
So we're
missing out here?
We will need to consider our investment into the program alongside DCC to make sure we're well aligned in terms of some of these key timeframes. And so obviously there is Kevin and John Luke have got existing budgets for the work that's undertaken, but we've got to consider what our future investment will need to be. Yeah. So your fellow councillor on this side of the table just emailed me while we were talking.
Okay, well, look, thank you very much. And look, I'd like to say thank you very much for the clarity of your answers on what is a really complex matter. Now, I wonder if anyone is ready to move the recommendation, which is noting the report. Councillor Mepham, second from Councillor Wilson. Does anyone wish to discuss further, anything further to say in the debate there?
Just, I think, this is a very important project. It's future looking. It's getting ahead of the disasters. And I think we've got to put as much effort as possibly can into getting this delivered on time.
Thanks. Anyone else? There we go. Okay, we will put the recommendation that we note the report. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Yes. Passed. Thank you very much. And thank you again for your presentation. Oh, Jonathan, can you remind us, when will we hear from you again?
So we anticipate coming back formally in October, so the October committee meeting, or it might be a full council meeting for a decision around so the revised program strategy. Though prior to that, we'll probably try and have a workshop or two with councillors.
Yes.
And on Monday, I'm having this conversation with DCC Council Committee.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks. Now, I understand, Jean-Luc and Gavin, you may be staying there because the next paper is 8.2, Head of Lake Whakatapi Natural Hazards Adaptation. And here's another complex issue we've got with multiple hazards, multiple work streams, technical and scientific work going on alongside community engagement. And again, a very important matter to a whole lot of people who live in and use that area. So look, I wonder if, before we start, if we could perhaps have a round of introduction, since we have a good looking panel up here. Perhaps, I'm not sure, Gavin, if you'd be able to introduce everyone, would that be okay?
I might let them introduce themselves, but just to let you know, I mean, it's a team effort on the paper. They're not only working on this project, they're working on multiple projects across the team program, but all contributed to this paper and to this program in some way. So start off with Anne.
Hi, Anne Conroy. I've recently joined ORC. I'm in the natural hazards team and in a new role in the team lead of adaptation.
Tim Van Warden, I'm a natural hazards analyst.
I'm Jamie McKenzie. I'm a natural hazards adaptation specialist.
Right, thank you very much. And Jean-Luc and Gavin, I think we've met you two before. So look, thank you. I guess we'll hand over to the panel there to introduce this paper, and then again we'll open that up to questions from councillors. So over to whoever's in charge. Jean-Luc, is it you?
Thank you. I'll just give a very quick introduction on the paper, but take it mainly as read. And my introduction is really to put the paper in context. So in May, we presented a paper to the same committee, and the report in May was really focusing about potential mitigation options for liquefaction and flood hazard. Today's paper is really trying to move into the next step, which is what matters most and how we're going to put all this information that was presented to council in May, but earlier, together to develop a National Hazard adaptation strategy. So the paper today is really about the development of the approach, and also it's giving some key updates. Last time, you remember, the social economic impact assessment was mentioned and discussed. So the paper is giving more detail around that work and progress. And we also have planned engagement session with the Glenorchy community in the months. So the paper also touched on that engagement process and also what we're trying to achieve at that session.
Right, thank you very much. Okay, we'll open that up to questions from councillors. Councillor Wilson.
Kia ora, thank you. I'm just trying to compare these two approaches, which are very, very similar, and some of the graphs are remarkably similar, and that's all great. But I suppose, and I don't know where you're all based, but if the difference with Dunedin is that they are running the project, and here it's an ORC run project, which has, I mean, it's great that the work is being done, but I'm wondering where the capacity in the Queenstown Lakes is building up to deal with natural hazards if we do it for them, because it is a territorial authority that, I mean, I've raised this issue before, and I'm just wondering why we've taken a different approach here, where we're doing much more of the work, I think, than Queenstown in looking at these issues. I'm not being critical. I'm just trying to get some efficiencies. Well, not necessarily efficiencies, just checking about who we do for what.
Yeah,
Consistency.
through Mr. Chair, very good question when you compare and contrast the two. There are many similarities, but there are some key differences in terms of the setting. In terms of South Dunedin, there is much infrastructure, Three Waters infrastructure, roading, community facilities that are owned by Dunedin City Council. Responsibility lies across multiple departments, and so part of Jonathan's role as program manager is to coordinate that within DCC response, as well as the interaction between ORC and DCC. In contrast, ORC doesn't own any infrastructure in South Dunedin. If we compare that to the head of Lake Wakatupu, we have a real interest from a river management point of view, and that's the origin of our work here in terms of Soil Conservation Rivers Control Act and managing the Dart and the Reese River and the hazard that presents to Glenorchy. We don't own any infrastructure there, but QLDC does. So it really comes down to what has been the driver for both of those projects and those infrastructure responsibilities and planning responsibilities, if that makes sense.
Oh, no, and that's absolutely fine. In my mind, it's troubling me as to fairness of the burden of doing the work, but I appreciate it's been done. This isn't what you spend all day on doing as well, and some of those costs have been done very efficiently with university researchers. Just point out, Jamie, I love reading your paper. Thank you very much. Are you on board with the ORC now?
Yes. Yeah.
Excellent. That was a really good and interesting paper and insight into the Glenorchy floods from many years ago. Thank you.
Councillor Forbes.
It's actually supplementary to that question, which was one I was considering as well. And I'm thinking about, you've got a DAPP program for QLDC. What's the difference between that program? I'm just trying to find the name of the one that you used, the framework you used for South Dunedin. Are they the same sort of model, or are they?
Yeah.
And that's exactly the same model.
Yeah, both applying DAP. It might be portrayed a little bit differently graphically, but it's the same concept around that cycle of,
what matters,
plan, do, adapt, that kind of thing. So yes,
yeah.
Conceptually they're identical.
And the other question was, does Glenorchy know about this meeting on 31st of August yet?
Yes, we updated them in the previous newsletter update that this community workshop will be happening, and we've started our comms and advertising for that, including the flyer that you will have seen has been going up, and as well as continuously comms and advertising.
So I did share it and then thought, I haven't seen it anywhere else, and I'm like, I haven't been out of line, but I'll see you there. Thank you very much. I think this is looking, the approach is right.
And I think an opportunity for other councillors to be involved on the 31st of August meeting in Glenorchy if they wish. Okay, thank you. Councillor Scott and then Wilson.
Yeah, Cole, thank you for all the work, all the positive work that's going on ahead of the Lake Waikato. Nevertheless, you know, some of these processes, they take so much time. I've got two questions. One is, and it's probably in the report, but I've missed it, is the timeframes for determining what matters most and the timeframe for achieving what can we do. And on the basis that we already know a lot, it seems to me, you know, are there any precautionary measures that we can put in place? And we talked about a similar thing, you know, for South Dunedin, but are there any precautionary measures that we can put in place for the general administration of Glenorchy and surrounds? So yeah, a comment on timeframe, specific dates, and any precautionary measures.
Well, in the time frame, it's, as in the previous paper, it's a balance between doing things as soon as practicable,
yeah,
but recognising that the community needs plenty of time to assimilate the issues and provide a response. So you've got to get that balance right. I think we've got the balance right on this program. It is actually quite ambitious to deliver a first cut strategy by June of next year. Is, I think, very, very ambitious.
Okay, so June next year, the first cut strategy.
Yes, it says that in the paper. We've got the timeline in there. So June 2024, that is very, very ambitious, I think. But nonetheless, we're committed to it and I'm delivering it at pace.
Thank you. Well done.
In terms, sorry, I forgot the rest of the question.
Well, it's just, are there any precautionary measures or processes that we can put in place in relation to Glenorchy? Because we know there's issues. We know there's, we've had previous presentations and flood risk of, you know, from various directions, liquefaction. This is not new, but we are translating it into, as you say, what matters most. So there's a risk assessment, there's a social assessment. What can we do? So I'll be interested in that. No doubt that'll come up in strategy, yeah? Cool. But in the meantime, are there any, where do things sit in relation to, if I was to build a house in Glenorchy, where does it sit? Well, it might for a while, and then it might be.
Paragraph 57.
Okay, cool.
Last bullet point. So the actually the two last bullet points. We've provided all the natural hazard information that we knew about QLDC. And my understanding is they taking this into account during the building consent process. And that's about the perfection. And also all this information is also available publicly on the natural hazard database. So anyone interested in developing a property, building a house, has this information available for the design and understanding.
Okay. I mean, we have a legal obligation to make these things public as soon as we know about them. But I think what we're saying is we're sort of pushing the paper over there and hoping that they do take it into consideration. Is that right? Are we doing more than that?
Well, we pass it across in the expectation that in the context of legal obligations and limitations, they will act on those things. Yeah. And it's not just a planning thing. We're always thinking about how do we manage the interim risk until such time as you get a longer term solution. And in the paper, we've talked about a number of things that we've acted on, including improved flood warning, more measurements, those kind of things. So it's not just a land use measure. There's a bunch of things that can be done to mitigate, not eliminate, but mitigate to some degree the interim risk until we have a longer term plan.
Cool, good answer. Thank you.
So I think that paper 8.2.1 on page 36 indicates actions that have already taken place or are in process, not that are way down the track. So that's useful, including, for example, the new flood warning and response procedures that's in a testing phase. So presumably not far off.
Yes, the community asked for more lake level recording. That was a very good suggestion. We did that. Then we've taken that further with the flood model. We've applied that once in a real flood, and we've integrated that into our flood response procedures. So that's an example of risk management.
Cool.
Thanks very much. Councillor Wilson, then Councillor Malcolm.
I just want to ask a question about communication, and thank you for the example of the what do you call it, program, a newsletter, and compare that. And I don't want to be harsh, it's going to sound harsh, but I don't mean to be. I attended the previous Hananoki meetings, and when it got to a wee bit of a lull, I went up to the pub to see how many people were in there in comparison and to try and engage with them, to go down there.
Oh, didn't we all?
No, this was during the meeting, and I was no, I did not drink while I was there. I wasn't actually, just wondering, and so what we see when we go to those meetings are the people that are really, really engaged, and they're outstandingly engaged and really impressed. And I think actually Jamie picked up on some of those comments. But the people that you're not getting is also an issue, and that's where I think the comms is so vital, that it becomes really, really engaging and not just wording. And I'm just wondering if we are hitting the mark there. So a success rate for me, maybe it's 80%, maybe it's 70% of the community engaged and understanding what's happening. It would be great to have a KPI on that, but impossible to measure. But I'm
Have it at the pub.
yeah, no, I'm not going to even suggest that. But I'm just wondering if there are steps that you could think about, or whether we are hitting that mark, or what success looks like really in that comms, because you want to have everyone in the field or listening, not just the.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you for that point. I think that's a really common challenge with any type of engagement program, is getting the right people in the room and getting everyone in the room. And that's something that I think we're constantly talking about as a team, about how we can improve our engagement sessions and our communications to reach a wider audience. And so I think, and that's also something that's a really iterative process too. You see who comes along, you see who might be missing, and to try and reach different groups. So one strategy we've decided for this next workshop is that we're going to also have a sausage sizzles fundraiser, which is going to be run by the PTFA to help to try and get a different group of people there. And also for community engagement later in the year, we're recognising that we may need really targeted engagement with some particular groups in the community who might not be as kind of keen to engage in some of the ways we have previously, and to try and reach them in different formats. We're also going to have an online component to this next engagement session to try and get feedback and involvement from a wider audience. So we're kind of testing the waters and seeing a few different ways of how we can engage with a much wider representative group at the head of the lake, but it's a continuous challenge for all engagement projects, definitely.
But if I can comment, I think using PFA as a tool to get some people there is excellent. I'd possibly be wondering whether we should be looking at a watershed meeting or something as well. And I know farming up there is slightly different, but it engages them in a different way as well, and working with our Beaver Lamb or the catchment groups. But no, that's great to hear.
Yeah, we're also, just one thing, we're, thinking about other community events where we might be able to go along and have a booth and talk to people about the information as well that we want to get across, so that, there's opportunities there to do that kind of thing.
It's great. And on that basis, and taking out cheers, just a suggestion, if that does happen, it would be great if the councillors heard about that too, if we happen to be in the vicinity or happy to drive over there and attend. It is those things that are gems for us to understand when it comes to sitting around the table. Thank you.
Luke, did you have something to say there?
I was going to close it out by saying that Jamie's an expert in this matter. Her master's thesis was on our community engagement program at the head of Lake Wakatipu. Her thesis is cited at the bottom of page 28.
Right, thank you very much. Great. Councillor Malcolm, then McCall.
It's probably a question to our CA is, Saunders, when do we decide that we have had enough commitment on this sort of process, and that when do we go from doing all this our legal statutory work to saying, well, actually, territorial authority, you need to handle this, we can support you, but where does that, what is our strategic position on that, or are we yet to?
So Gavin will correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is we have a commitment at the moment to deliver the strategy by June 2024, and then there's been no decisions made past that point that has committed ORC to any action, and that would be the point in time where decisions will need to be made about whether or not ORC is involved in any further work in this space.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yes, CE is correct. Having made a commitment publicly and having consulted on this through long-term plan that we would get to that point, we are now obliged to get to that point. But beyond that, that's up to you to make some future
So they're
decisions.
just saying that that's not going to align with LTP.
Yeah.
So we need to accept that, but that goes to one of Kate's points from earlier today around the fact that there's some big decisions we may need to make in our interim years that will affect our spending. But that's the point in time where ORC will need to make some decisions about what our role is in this in the future once this phase of work's complete.
Yeah, and that's the historic way that we have done it.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm not,
Yeah, I
happy
don't-
to either answer. Yeah.
And there'll be some things that are somewhat discretionary, but not much, like managing river, soil conservation, rivers control that we've got a mandate there. You know, we don't have to fix every problem, but we've got to give it due consideration. There'll be some stuff there which is more aligned to core business.
Yeah.
Then there'll be other things that are future decisions for you to make. Importantly, we're not alone here. There are other players in this, Queenstown Lakes District Council, maybe some government agencies.
Yeah.
And that will be an important discussion once we've got more clarity around the strategy as to roles and responsibilities. And again, the national setting at the moment, the unfortunate incidents up north are causing us all to think about roles and responsibilities, particularly of central government.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Kelleher.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'm just trying to turn that off. Thank you. My video won't turn off. Okay, right, thank you. Question, I'd like to tease this out a little bit. Brian has a 1-bedroom cottage in Glenorchy on 5,000 square metres, and he lodges a resource consent application to QLDC in a month's time for 10 new units on that section. What would your expectation of QLDC be, and also what would ORC's planning team do in that circumstance?
So I can go first if you like. So we would most likely lodge a submission in opposition to that. We would get support from the natural hazards team as we have done on the basis of natural hazard, assuming it's in a risky area, and we do have a little bit of a different profile, but assuming it's in one of the areas that we believe development should be avoided, then we would submit in opposition, much like we did the hotel in Glenorchy a couple of years ago.
Which were unsuccessful.
Which we were successful in getting a really good outcome.
So Gary, we can't really speak to what QLDC's planning team would do, but we have got the example of a hotel where we have played an active role, and that's what I would expect us to continue to do within the bounds of the RMA and what we're able to do. But ultimately, even those ones, the decisions sit with the court as they, and we can't guarantee ourselves an outcome.
Right, so we have actually entered a phase where the community there are now impacted by what they could do in comparison to any other area because of the detail we are gathering.
So can I just say we submit across Otago for natural hazards reasons, not just in Glenorchy, and oppose things. So we've got more information for Glenorchy, but it is not the only place that we take that approach.
And have for some time, like many years.
Yes.
We can't unknow what we know.
Okay, no, that answers the question. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary. Okay, thank you. Councillor McCall.
Oh, yeah. Oh, sorry. I just had a quick comment regarding working with the people, getting people along. I find Mr. Whippy's really good. He can draw a crowd. We've used them extensively.
Thank you. Thank you. Any further questions from any councillors? No, Tim, look, I'm sorry, you haven't had a chance to answer a question. Is there one you can think of you'd like to answer?
Fine, you'll hear from me in the next paper.
Right, okay. Well, look, if that's all the questions we've had, and again, thank you very much for your answers to what's complex business. I think we're ready to move those recommendations, of which there are two. One, that we note the report. Second, that we note the head of Lake Whakatipu Natural Hazards Adaptation Work Programme and Community Engagement. Would anyone care to move and second those? Alexa, move. Elliot, second. Anyone wish to speak to those?
I'd just like to say that I think it's a really good process. It's really hard for the community up there. It's really difficult decisions to make, difficult plans to make. They have to really think about things, and they have to really understand what does matter to them and how they're going to keep their community together and what they're doing, and whether they have to respond at all is, of course, something that they have to think about. And I just hope that they continue to engage and that we carry on with this process. I think we've got the right process in place, but it's big for a community to have to even think this way. And thank you, team.
Yeah.
Yes, Elliot.
Say that I am just very glad that we're doing it, this kind of work, and same with our South Dunedin work now, while it's an opportunity rather than a necessity. That's going to cost us and people, or save us and people a lot.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other speakers? No? Well, look, we'll put those two recommendations together. All those in favour?
Aye.
Again? All good. Thank you very much. And again, thank you very much for your participation, for helping today. So while we've got 8.3 coming up, we might have a little changeover of personnel perhaps, which is program update on the climate resilience, flood repairs and projects. I'll better find it. And it looks as though we have more people coming. Excellent. And perhaps, look, if you could just quickly run through their roles in this up front.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Somerville, Chair Somerville. We're pleased to be here. I just want to clarify that in the title, it's a program update focusing on climate resilience and flood repairs. And we are touching on the recent weather events, so projects. I'm sorry for the confusion there. I would like to introduce, we have 4 staff supporting this paper. Online, we have Cassie Newman, who's our engineering analyst in our engineering team. Cassie has recently done a thesis that was in the media around 3D and aerial imagery to map dynamics of coastal sites with anthropogenic debris. That's relevant to something that we're going to show you prior to getting into the paper. I'd like to introduce our colleague, Mr. Tim Van Wooden from Natural Hazards, who's also supporting the Purua section. And I'd like to introduce our team leader in our program management project delivery, Brett Patterson. We'd like to do something a little bit different with this paper. We just have a very brief PowerPoint to show you, jumping to the section in the paper around the Purua. We have a small drone imagery and just a few slides to give you an overview on that, if that's okay with you.
No, that's an excellent idea.
Thank you.
Let's get that, see if we can get that going.
Okay, Michelle. So I'll speak briefly to the section starting from paragraph 82 in the paper, which is around recent coastal erosion damages down at the outfall of the Purua River and the Kowal mouth. So I'll just share my screen. This presentation.
And I can just note that that presentation is in the Diligent Resource Centre for anyone who wishes to view it later.
So I've just got only 3 slides here, just giving some of the, explaining some of the context more than what's in the paper. This cover image is just a still from a drone image, which shows the Kowal branch of the Clutha Metau in the foreground, and you see the Purua River flowing from the top of the screen with an outfall to the Kowal branch through a series of culverts, and then a outlet flowing across the beach, which naturally broke through in early July during that coastal erosion event. First of all, to step back and look at the full Clutha Delta coastline. So this is the red and blue colours on the image are a geomorphic change analysis that Cassie has completed for us. Basically looking at two different LiDAR surveys from 2020 and then July 23, captured shortly after this recent erosion. Essentially subtracted one from the other and looked at what differences there are. And you'll see the red colours are representing erosion or a lowering of the ground surface between those two surveys, and blue are showing sedimentation. So you see that large red areas on the shoreline, that's showing erosion and shoreline retreat, particularly the area to the south of the Clutha's Kowal mouth, and then also up around the Matau mouth. Zoom in the next image to look at the Kowal mouth. Again, just got a before and after aerial imagery. This one is in the paper. So you see from 2020 through to the current picture, July 2023, the entire beach or shoreline has retreated inland by around 100 metres. There's been extensive sediment infill into the estuary of the Puarua. And you'll see that the beach itself in 2020 extended essentially continuously up to the training line structure as a continuous dune system. That's now extensively eroded inland, exposing the training line structure a lot more to wave action. So yes, it's quite a dramatic change in just a couple of years, and the bulk of it happening within a couple of weeks. And one last image to demonstrate the value of the high resolution surveys we're able to capture, showing ground elevations are in that Kowal mouth area. So you see on the left, the 2021 image, a high continuous dune. The current state is that the crest level of that dune has lowered by 1.5 to 2 metres at least. You can see the channel that naturally opened out to the sea, adjacent to the training line. And again, you see the training line structure itself is sitting out, projecting it out to the coast a lot more beyond the beach than what it previously did. And then the next thing I'll share is a brief piece of drone footage. There we go, which just gives a great overview of the setting. So this is taken looking northwards up the beach. You see the training line in the middle distance, essentially flying up along the top of the sand dune. So the Kowal branch of the Clutha flowing left to right, and then the Puarua River also coming from the left and flowing through the culverts into the Kowal. So I'll just start that now. Just pause that now. So yeah, it's an illustration of the amount of wave action we're now seeing impacting on the seaward part of the training line structure. This video was taken on a rising tide. It's not yet high tide, but you'll see waves are flowing up through that natural outlet or over the beach up into the estuary system, where we previously had a 3 to 4 metre high sand dune. So there's a much greater, I guess, exposure or ability of waves to overtop into that estuary, and that's a factor on the amount of sediment that's now being moved inland by wave action across the beach. So, thank you.
Thank you. And that change has, I know, just occurred really in the week of the 3rd of July. So it's very, very recent. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Over to you again.
Okay, thank you. We will take the paper as largely read and look to answer any questions, or if you'd like an overview of any of the particular sections around climate resilience or the flood repairs or all this, please guide us what you'd like to talk about.
Oh, to Michelle, we've got a couple of questions. I think it might be worth starting just having viewed those pictures and the footage.
Start
with a brief
section
outline of the significance of that change and what our planned actions are. But then we've got Tim and Kevin.
I've been down there a few times fishing and light baiting, and so I'm familiar with the area. I'm just trying to figure out in my own mind what we're actually trying to protect. There's a lot of work that's going on there, and I guess I'm sort of asking this question, having attended a lecture a few weeks ago from Forest and Bird, where they had a chap talking about letting rivers be rivers, and sort of looking at particularly the braided rivers. So what is it we are protecting there? Is that rural land, that dairy land that's right on the edges of the river there? Are we protecting that from flooding, or what's the purpose of it?
So I can lead with this. In terms of protection, I probably would turn that around to stabilisation. We actually have 2 scheme functions here currently. So we have infrastructure that operate our drainage scheme. And we have a pump station just further up in the Purua. We also, on the right-hand side, when you're looking back at figure 22, we have our flood banks, which is our Lower Clutha Flood Protection Scheme. So the actual piece of infrastructure, the training line that has the culverts, is largely related to the drainage scheme, which currently provides an outlet. And also functions as providing egress for the Clutha. So going back to your question then, what are we largely protecting? What we're looking at is what we don't know at the moment, which is the impact on the levels of service and the land that the schemes actually provide functionality for. The Purua, through natural means, has opened up. Okay, so you've actually got natural processes here. What we need to do, and Tim, John Luke, we can probably comment on the work that we're doing to support those investigations, is understanding the impact on that infrastructure and what that looks like. We've very much forecast this and have this in our long-term plans. We've already done adaptation, a small adaptation piece of work around our infrastructure, which was examining the training line, and what we need to do to tactically maintain it as the coastal adaptation work that natural hazards progress. What we've just seen is a rate of acceleration quite rapidly. So it's quite likely that this will function naturally But until we have an assessment on the impact that it has on a current level of service that we provide via those schemes, we need to respond to ensure that we've got drainage and the mouth opening for the Clutha.
Thank you. Councillor Malcolm.
Yeah, I'm just, probably what I'm trying to work out is what that training line is actually doing. And if it was not there and the river was just being a river, what is the consequence of that? And is that what you have? Is that what we don't know?
Yeah, well,
And so
perhaps the training line is to maintain an open mouth, so it's promoting flushing of sediment.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we'd end up with an offset mouth and potentially blocking the mouth. So the idea of a training line is to try and fix the position, if you like, a little bit, but also promote flushing so that sediment deposition occurs in the coastal zone rather than right at the mouth. So it's got a very important sediment transfer function. And without that, we would potentially have offsetting of the mouth and complete blockage potentially. So in the first instance, our issue is how do we deal with damage and ensuring that structure which we own. Because the training line is there, it needs to have a free outflow for the Puarua. That's why the culverts are there. And so those have become compromised because they've filled up the sand basically and they're physically damaged. And then there's the bigger issue around shoreline retreat and then rising groundwater level with rising sea level. So the first up, the most urgent issue really is around assuring the effectiveness of those structures.
Right. So probably the question is why was that structure and when was it put in? Why was it put in? And why was it put in? And you're training the river, I see, but
It's put in the
1983, I think.
It's old catchment board work, and there's another one on the north branches where they're quite common. The problem we've got though with the shoreline retreat is it's starting to expose the structure to wave action, and that's been our concern for some time. And you might recall a paper we brought up on the broader thing. What we're seeing now is rapid acceleration of those processes that were happening quite quickly, and now we've seen in the last month significant acceleration of those retreat processes, which is of concern.
So put an option B once we understand. Once we understand the effectiveness of what it's doing, it may be a position that we don't do anything to that structure. We just let the sea do what it wants to do to the sea, providing we've got the mouth open, if that's its only role. I'm just sort of, because prior to that, the mouth used to close and then it got opened by diggers and bulldozers.
We've got some decisions to make as an organisation around what do we rebuild, what do we decommission, what might we relocate, and that's part of that broader program. So
I think
that's all part of those future decisions that we need to make based on the information we're gathering at the moment through a hazards program.
And probably my thought on that would be, and this is the question, is if we don't know, we need to know the effectiveness of that effort of what's there, and is that doing its purpose if we do rebuild it, or do we in fact need to go somewhere else? And is that the question you're trying to answer? Because I'd rather spend money finding that out rather than putting money into that structure if in fact it's not going to work long term anyway.
No, we're not looking. The work that we've been doing is simply stabilising.
Cool.
And it is highly likely, depending on the new information we get, it'll be a method of treatments, which means we may look at slowly retiring part of that. But at the moment, both of those schemes have a dependency on the training line at the moment. So we've got to adapt infrastructure, which is all forecast in our infrastructure strategy and long-term plan anyway. Okay, so we also have not just the culverts through the training line that act as drainage, but there's several gravity flow outflows that also depend on that structure providing, and you saw it a little bit in the drone, the conditions that this event happened under created quite a lot of surface water that we would have normally otherwise drained away. But because the sand is basically infilling those culverts and opening up a new mouth, we just need to understand what that impact further into the scheme will do.
Yeah, yeah. So is that sand in fact creating more land further up?
We can raise it.
Probably just moving the beach further
It's
inland.
probably just
Yeah.
moving
But
further in.
the key point here is we're only doing what we need to do to stabilise it for the short term
Yeah.
and nothing beyond that because
Yeah.
of the big picture
Yeah.
things we need to sort.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We've got a line up of questions. The rest of this paper, of course, includes a whole lot of information about other flood repair projects and also some broader information about future co-investment proposals. So there's a whole lot more in here, but we'll go to Alexa, Kate, Elliot, and then Brian. Alexa first.
My question is in the same vein, and it's a good reminder, thank you, because it is for this structure, but also others. If we were looking at putting those in today, would we do it?
Likely not.
I think that's a-
hang on, I want to caution that before
Yeah.
somebody
I can
seizes
understand
that.
it's a really hard
I think
question.
today with this environmental lens and our approach around giving rivers room to move and you know what we're wanting to achieve, possibly it may not be that hardened engineering structure. It might be a combination of things.
'Cause
It's very
yeah.
different to where we were sort
Yeah,
of looking
exactly.
40, 50 years ago. We might have a different approach around what we're trying to achieve. Possibly.
I feel
don't-
like
you
we
know.
kind of need to understand that. Would we still do it today? And your question, Tim, what are we protecting? It's really hard. And I guess in this, and I think we've already got some of that in this report, but do we really understand the consequences of maybe dismantling some of these structures?
Well, that's the work we need to gather
carry
a
on,
little
yeah.
bit more information to support and inform, I guess, this acceleration in the coastal erosion and the impact on schemes that we know now that were designed in the 50s and 60s. We do have a degree of, you know, there are a lot of landowners here that rely on those schemes at the moment, and we have responsibility to provide a level of service now.
Right.
So that's what our assets do. So it's having a look at how that's impacted and what some sort of transition or adaptation to infrastructure looks like as well.
So some more serious discussions with commuters.
Yes, absolutely.
There are some big things, but I think the point Michelle made just then is the critical one, is we have a level of service that the council are committed to, and that is what is being maintained through the work to ensure that this structure does what it is supposed to do. There are some huge conversations to have if this council is looking at alternative levels of service and the impacts that that might have, but that is a future work program. At the moment, given that level of service, the onus is on the council to do this work, and I think what we've heard today is that's as far as we're going with this work, is to maintain what is there. So just given we are in a public meeting, we need to be clear that that's the outcome that's being sought, and that there are no decisions being made about future level of service or anything associated with that, because that's a much broader conversation we need to have. And then once the level of service is established, then there might be multiple options, including hard infrastructure right back to, let the river do its thing, and there's costs associated with all of those options. So, yeah.
It's also a really good time, thank you, C, to really be innovative and really incorporate a lot of nature-based solutions and, different ways of how we're actually doing our work around flood protection, land drainage.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, everyone. Councillor Wilson.
No, I'm nervous to ask this question now in light of the CEO's comment, but I actually want to get my head in a different space. I suppose, can I just understand who's paying for that work at the moment? Is that all those local farmers?
So that work is subject to contact energy consent contribution.
I was wondering about that.
Yep.
Yeah. And what sort of percentage are they paying?
I think this work is subject to about 90%. They have been informed, they've been across this the whole way. I let them know that around the emergency works. This work and maintenance was already forecast this year, so it's not a surprise to them. So yes.
Okay. I just and two other comments about the whole report. One is the work on the Lower Taieri and noting that the contour channel, the work and how that's progressing looks great. And I may have raised this question before, I can't recall the answer. There has been interest from the Colin Brown expressed around this table about the cycleway. Has there been any thinking as that contour work happened about enabling or thinking about how that might look for them should they get their access over that, or has it been completely discrete work?
I can lead with this. The contour channel, as we've mentioned several times, how it started 10 years ago. We've been very enabling and engaging with Colin Brown and the Taieri Trails Trust, including we had a site visit a few weeks ago, and we're having regular email communications now. Our understanding is they're looking at a few different routes, not necessarily focusing on the contour channel at this moment. But no, we didn't consider the trail on a contour channel when this was designed in a climate resilience phase. Yeah. So, yeah.
And the last question is, and it's probably for the whole team and the IT group, the flood recovery works map, and I've zoomed into the ones that Kevin has mentioned a number of times to me, and the way that that is now mapped on the that link is absolutely excellent. And I really hope that it's your flood recovery website page and how that works and interacts, and you can see the work coming up. Really, congratulations to the whole team on how that looks, and I hope it's the way we can roll out a whole lot of our work programs, because it sort of makes really intuitive sense, and it's the geospatial way it's presented is fantastic. So well done.
Thank you. I'd like to also channel that to our engineering analyst, Cassie Newman, who actually did the architecture behind that, and Pam Wilson, who has also been supporting that as well. I really appreciate that, because we're trying to do more in that space to give interactive access around our work programs. So it's really good.
When you can provide it for Willow Control, I'll be delighted. But you know, I'm also realistic that you can't do everything at once.
That's actually happening in the background too. So thank you. It was good to receive that, Councillor Wilson.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Councillor Weir.
Yeah, I'm wondering if this climate resilience program that's got on sort of, I understand it's a provincial growth fund kind of thing, so it probably has an expiry date. But I'm wondering if it's something that would fold into our climate mitigation and adaptation strategy when that was developed, or if this is something that would sit separately, or how that would work. I don't know.
Start and then Brett can continue.
Future proofing and climate change considerations are part of everything we do in this kind of space. It's called the Climate Resilience Program, although some projects are, all of the projects are have some climate change element, although they're probably more driven fundamentally by safety risks, if you like. So yeah, it's a very good example of adaptation in practice, if you like, rebuilding, reconstructing assets to modern standards, incorporating climate change considerations. There's certainly a lot more we should be doing, and we've talked there about the next tranche of projects that the Regional Council sector has compiled, the 92 projects, where there's a bit of information in there, and that remains live in terms of hoping to get some further central government co-investment in those things. So yes, I think the strategy would cite that work, and that would be a component, if you like.
It would cite it and refer to it, but not envelop it.
I think it probably would, because it's almost a BAU, if you like. It's just good practice, if you like, and so it's something that we do anyway. But I think it's an important part of this council's work on climate change generally, in the adaptation side of
it. Thank you. Good. Councillor Scott.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry, Brett. Sorry, over to you.
No, I was just going to clarify the funding is from through ND rather than PFG. So the project growth fund's kind of shifted a wee bit and rolled into MB and is now funded through an organisation. I don't really know.
Cool.
Right.
Thank you. Page 98. It's the delivery roadmap for the central government co-investment in flood protection scheme budget 2023 funding. I think that's what Gavin's just referred to. And if I skim down there, Otago Regional Council, is an overall expenditure of 35 million, which I understand would be 21 by central government and council spend of 14. Yeah, I just wondered if you could just talk us through that. We're currently doing the 4 climate resilience projects. So I'm assuming this starts from mid-23, 24. Yeah, and just, actually, is that right? Yeah. Anyway, just if you could just, it's in there. I think Gavin, you've been saying there's a lot of work in there. It's a consolidated co-investment approach for all the TAs and regional councils. And it's a lot of money into the future. And it's awaiting central government feedback, is it?
Feedback was received, and the decision was at the time that there would be no co-investment forthcoming in respect of these particular things at that time. The need still exists in North Island events, just highlight the importance of building resilience before events rather than after. And so we're still working together as a sector, seeking to get co-investment at some point. Our projects remain live. We are still delivering these projects. Like, this has moved on a little bit, obviously. Yeah. So Michelle might want to speak to that, but we carry on delivering this work because it's essential work.
But I mean, like, the allowance was only 14 million from the council and 21 from central government. So we're obviously not providing the total sum, are we?
No, and it has an effect on timing, but Michelle might want to talk about.
Yeah, so on page, thank you for the question, Councillor Scott. On page 104, I attached the list of projects that we Otago Regional Council provided in that tranche with the rest of the regional councils. And
in the future would provide, is that what you're saying, or have provided?
No, have provided. So when we provided this in 2022. Okay, and those projects drew from our current long-term plan and infrastructure strategy. So the 14 million you're talking about, what that drew from is what we currently have projected in our long-term plans and current works that we had in our annual plans. So as Gavin was saying, and we're doing this as a sector, not just Otago, this has moved on now because some of these work programs are moving. We're keeping it live, and there is actually, I guess, a move to get infrastructure strategy from a sector perspective, which is pulling together this so that we are consistently in front of government with this value of projects. Now those projects, some of them aren't in our long-term plan because they are areas like Middlemarch or others that we wanted to have a chance to accelerate some works in those areas.
Right, I understand that because there is quite a bit of discussion about this package of work that was put up to central government and was very by the sector, including Otago's work, was very well received and is highly likely to have received funding if we hadn't had the events in the North Island. And funding that may have been made available has obviously been diverted up there for good reason. There is still and this is obviously in a little bit of limbo pending central government election, but there is still a strong desire from regional councils to get this in front of the next government to try and get some commitment for long-term funding support of resilience work. And so I think that you will see more efforts from the river managers group, from the CEs and from the chairs to push this with central government in the next term of government.
Cool. Okay. And As a matter of interest, as part of our LTP discussions, will we be going through specific projects, just like is sort of outlined here?
Yes.
Yeah.
And we're doing work on our infrastructure strategy review and update. And
Yeah.
as part of that process, we'll be coming back on that. If I could just add, as the CE says, the key here is long-term funding pipeline. We've got to get out of the short-term stuff because it becomes very disruptive as to have we got a contribution or have we not got a contribution. We need an assured pipeline of funding so we can plan with certainty.
Yeah.
And that's the key.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions from councillors? Kevin?
Yep. Right, so on the Clutha drainage schemes and Lower Clutha flood protection drainage schemes, you seek concept of increasing the annual Kirrawaya reserve contribution. That's on page 67.
Yeah.
Paragraph 80.
Yep.
So probably what I'm asking there is, you may not have these figures now, but is what you're currently getting from it, and is the rate that you're taking that money from that reserve diminishing the reserve, or are we getting enough earnings to keep that reserve at a current level? Then would it be more advantageous for us to diminish the reserve to get works completed for a long-term goal?
Thanks, councillor. There's a few questions in there. I was trying to find. Sorry, that section about the Kirrawaya, I guess Gavin and I talked about, what are our options around funding our adverse events and weather events. So it was just put in there to say, look, for the Lower Clutha scheme, we can potentially apply to council to have an increase from that reserve. I guess that's really for us to sort of explore that if we wish. We haven't yet.
Right. So it's just a concept at this stage.
It's a concept, because as you'll see in this paper, we've accessed and are accessing NEMA, and Contact Energy, where we've actually got some repairs that fall under their applicable consents. But it's probably a broader discussion that I hope to have during this LTP process, what a strategy might be around ongoing weather event and reserve management.
Yeah, but look, just to explain my thought around that, is that if we grabbed a big chunk of the capital from there and applied it to a particular scheme, that gave us say a 50-year result.
The Kirrawaya, and I don't have the full details. It actually has specific criteria about benefits to the community. It doesn't really relate to capital infrastructure. So, some of the repairs, we need to be cognizant of making sure it fits within that criteria. But possibly.
Yeah. Right. So that you come to us with its parameters and where you'd like to use it as part of the long-term plan.
I think we'd have a discussion, Gavin, Nick and Sean, around, what we may want to propose. And as we probably need to do a little bit of investigation around the applicability of applying to that fund. Because it might, be best suited in doing broader community
that's right.
outcomes too, as opposed to focusing just on infrastructure.
Thank you. And I've got further ones in it.
I'll just have a really quick follow-up on that one, because I had that one marked as well. So the Kirrawaya fund, so it's not depleting just now.
No, it just
stays at the level and you're using the investment returns. So,
might be best for Nick to answer that question.
Yeah, is Nick online?
I hear you.
Great.
Did you catch all that question, Nick?
I did. Look, the Kirrawaya reserve, in theory, is just increasing with the returns on that reserve. I can't remember the exact number, but there's millions in there. It's got quite a lot of funds in there. There's about a few $100,000 allocated to the schemes there every year, but that reserve, so it's not diminishing. In fact, it's going up because, we're now down to, we've only got a couple of Kirrawao properties to complete freeholding. So over the last couple of years, we've actually probably freeholded, probably on average one property per year. So that money goes into the reserve. So that reserve has probably grown, grown a couple of million over the last couple of years rather than going down.
Thanks, Nick. Just to quickly highlight, those values are in paragraphs 76 and 77. So Sean updated for me, Nick, it's currently got 7.4 million. And the Clutha scheme receives about 250,000 out of that annually, currently.
Okay, thanks. Kevin, did you have one?
And just going to page, to paragraph 95, legislative and risk considerations. So we've got some infrastructure and we've told the community, here's your flood protection scheme and we're looking after it and we're doing it well. And so one of our risks is if they are in fact vulnerable to future damage, and that could be a cost and risk to the IRC. So what actually is what is our liability of these schemes if they're not maintained correctly and don't perform as to what we have stated that they should perform? And how is that covered?
I should just clarify, the comment in paragraph 95 was really related to the flood repairs as opposed to maintenance or things like that. So the reason I put that it is a cost risk to ORC, the residual of repair and remediation costs will fall to the scheme reserves currently.
Yeah, so I'm saying if in fact we don't, if we haven't spent the money, haven't got that fixed, and those schemes aren't maintained correctly to the standard they should be, what is our liability and how do we cover that?
So I would say that and I wouldn't have any facts and figures, Kevin, but the position is that if we have committed to a level of service and are not maintaining that, and something goes wrong, then I would expect that this council would be liable. So that's why it's important that we do the work to ensure that they are operating and that we have records that demonstrate we have done the work to ensure that the condition of those assets mean they operate as designed.
Yep. We need to be comfortable that that's happening.
Yeah, super important.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks very much.
Okay.
Thank you, Steve.
You understood what your thing was.
Sorry. And just to reiterate what the CE said, that's part of our BAU. That's what our staff are doing most of the time.
Looks as though there are no further questions. Is there anything else before we move on to the recommendations that our panel would like to highlight for us? We're quite happy.
Brett, would you like to comment on the climate resilience program?
Yeah, I can briefly. So yeah, the climate resilience program has been progressing pretty well. We've got 3 out of our 4 fully complete. 2 of those 3 were completed well ahead of schedule, which was very good. And the 4th project is progressing to likely be completed ahead of schedule as well. So it's no real comment, though. Those have been tracking pretty well at this stage. Still got a full season of construction to get through and weather dependent, but yeah.
Thanks.
I'm happy to move the recommendations.
You are. All 3 of those recommendations together there, Kate. So we've got 1 receiving the report, 1 noting the progress on the climate resilience program, 1 noting the recent storm damage at the mouth of the Clutha River. Thank you. So Kate has moved, a seconder for that. Thank you, Elliot. Anyone wish to discuss further?
I just want to mention, like, just tidying it up. It's interesting that we're looking at the mouth of the Clutha Matau right now. If one went back to 1878, there was a wonderful township called Port Molyneux down there. I had the enjoyment of going round through Baldwin recently, and it was a very big wee town with an octagon and a main street similar to Stewart Street, and it got flooded out with and the whole area and the whole mouth changed. And it's good to stop and think. Sometimes we think that adaptation is a new thing, and we're reacting to climate change in different ways. This stuff has been happening in this area for 150 years, And I think we just have to be very, very wary of thinking that we can control Mother Nature in this process, but being forewarned is certainly, I get concerned that we give the idea sometimes that it's flood stopping rather than giving time to react. And that's a very, very different message that I think we all have to become very aware of with resilience. So sorry, going slightly more into depth, but
thank you.
Tying up the reports.
Gary, did you wish to speak on that? I see you've appeared.
No, I'm okay. Thank you. Good
Okay.
report.
Thank you. Well, look, we'll put those three recommendations. All those in favour?
Right.
Against? All done. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you again for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Somerville.
Now we have one more paper. Come back. Now, the Civil Defence and Emergency Management Partnership Report. Just wonder, is the appetite amongst councillors for a brief break? Or do you just want to carry on? Carry on?
Get us out of here.
Okay. Right. That's on there, online. Excellent. Right. So paper 8.4 it is. We've got Matt online, Gavin in the room, and this report is, as it describes it, a report on our delivery of our responsibilities under our Civil Defence Emergency Management Agreement. Of course, we do work with the other TAs in the region, but we do have specific responsibilities, and that is what this report is about. So I'll hand over either to Gavin or to Matt to present, and then we'll open up for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll take it as read. Council will recall about a year ago it decided to enter into the partnership agreement with other territorial authorities in respect of civil defence and emergency management in Otago. And 12 months on, I've prepared this report on the performance measures and the targets for the Otago Regional Council component of that partnership. So it's a report back on how we've done in terms of delivering our obligations under that agreement. I can take any questions.
Right. Thank you. Kate.
Thank you. I'm looking at where the red lines aren't, and maybe it's because that isn't where we're considered we've got a role. But I'm just checking. So the group participants, where you've got emergency services, and in my area that would be the local fire brigade and the police, but some will be other services. And you've got this researchers, you've got non-government organisations, volunteer groups, community groups. We don't seem to have any lines showing up there, and that may be because you've deferred that all to TA. Is that the case?
Are you referring to figure 2?
Yeah, sorry.
You're on page 110.
Apologies.
Yep, it's okay. What is the question?
So if I look at the structure and thinking about what happened in Cyclone Gabrielle, and the response was strongest where there were strong community groups able and well connected, is I had the pleasure of hearing Sam, the trackman, on this. I'm just wondering whose role is to do those connections with those group participants, because they're not showing up as something we do, and ensuring that someone is connecting them in, because it seems a very imbalanced side otherwise.
Yes, I understand the question. I think Matt could probably explain how that works in terms of those connections.
Hi there, can you hear me?
We can now.
That's good, Matt, thanks.
Yeah, kia ora everyone. Yeah, essentially that is the role of coordinating executive group, to pull all of those partners together. Essentially that group is then responsible for delivery on strategic directions as defined in our group plan. But essentially how all those groups together, it's at a coordinating executive group level. Those responsibilities are clearly defined within the Act.
So it's not the ORC's job, is what you're saying?
That's correct.
Okay.
So who is the coordinating executive group that is doing that? And yeah, I suppose the way this graph is, and it shows what we do, but it doesn't show that other things are being done. I suppose that's, if you just look at the graph, if that makes sense.
Yes, look, it does. I mean, the responsibility for CEDAM within Otago is ultimately the responsibility for the Joint Committee, to which the ORC is a member. And that is both a collective responsibility within that group and then an individual responsibility depending on broader roles. The delivery for CEDAM in terms of how that actually translates to operational activity is the responsibility of the coordinating executive group. Obviously, Richard is a member of that group formally, and that group is directly responsible to Joint Committee for that delivery.
I would just add, just a reminder that this arrangement is legislated under the Civil Defence. It's a different thing to LGA. It's got its own governance delivery arrangement. Yes.
So I get all that. I'm taking the view, and I probably should have set the setting, is that our role, you've got elected representatives, and that I think is Gretchen at the top, who oversees this. We have a statutory responsibility as joint elected members to ensure that these things are happening. I can see clearly that, and it's great to see that we've taken responsibility and are doing things. I suppose, and this is feedback for next time when this report comes, just knowing that those other links are being made and who's doing that is just understanding that, because at the moment it looks very busy with the red lines of what is being done, but it leaves a vacuum of what is, and maybe I'm just reading the graph wrong.
Okay, can I just clarify? You're talking about more detail around that bottom communities, emergency readiness, response and recovery activities, and how the role that we are playing in that?
Yeah, we're just making sure that these connections are, because these are the ones that will be delivering on the ground in many places, that the people in the left-hand blocks are feeding in, because there is no red lines here, it's hard to see that is happening. Yes. And sorry, I don't mean to be difficult, and maybe I'm just reading the graphic wrong.
No, it's a very good question and a very good comment. I understand it. I think the issue here is this report is deliberately focused narrowly on partnership agreement, ORC component. It's not intended to be an overall group report where that kind of stuff would be covered and explained. I'm not saying it's not important, except this paper focuses on a particular element, which is the ORC component through the partnership agreement. It's the group delivering those connections. It's not actually the ORC.
Okay. Maybe it's something I need to make sure I get around with. It's actually an audit and risk question to a certain extent. I'm just sure now I'll sort it out in my own mind.
Okay, thanks. We've got Councillor Scott, then Councillor Malcolm.
Cool. Now, if there was a significant earthquake in Queenstown tomorrow, and the response from CDEM was really good, and so forth, we as governors would get a pat on the back. If the response is really bad, we as governors will probably get a kick in the bum. How do I know as a governor that all systems are in place and ready to go? Do I take that from the green and red dots, like 47 achieved, 6 partly achieved, 1 not achieved, 5 not applicable? Do I take it from that? Or do you, for example, do dummy runs and a governance representative witness that and take confidence that everything's in place? How do I get that level of assurance? Because it's a serious question. Yeah.
I think Matt can explain the role of the joint committee, and its oversight would probably be the best way to start to answer that question.
Sure. So as a standing item, we report quarterly to both the KEG and the Joint Committee on our activity as it relates to the group plan. And there will be all sorts of reports in there, direct reports from our Lifelines critical infrastructure group. We have direct report from a committee, it's called the Readiness and Response Group, which is all the emergency service partners. We have a welfare coordination group update, which is all of those welfare agencies, MSD, MPI, and others, Oranga Tamariki, that all feed into that. Now, all of these groups, essentially all of these reports are put together and fed into, first of all, the KEG and then the Joint Committee. And it's obviously the Joint Committee's responsibility to measure our effectiveness in terms of how we're tracking alongside the group plan and the activities that we undertook as part of that plan.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, that doesn't actually reassure me. Some third party, it's got it all under control. Well, I wish that third party would demonstrate it to me. We've had previous resolutions that this council have said that certain information is to be fed through this council. For example, a lot of the staff that are employed by CDCM are in fact employed by us. How do we get that assurance as opposed to just a few words over a Zoom? Surely there's an independent audit or something like this to demonstrate not only to us and to our community that all systems are go. How do we get that assurance?
Look, if I can, Gavin, look, that's something that the national agency is currently working on. I've just come out of a 2-day workshop with NEMA, and a big part of that was national assurance and NEMA's role in how they independently review and assess groups' effectiveness. So that's an active piece of work by the national agency at the moment. In terms of tracking information and information that's available, all of that is publicly available on our website. So everything that we provide to governance, in particular the Joint Committee, is publicly available for you, and we do normally circulate that as a matter of course.
Okay.
Gretchen, do you want to add something to that?
Matt pretty much covered it, which was fantastic. But yeah, as the chair of that joint group, I've just actually circulated, Brian and Kate, but I can circulate to everyone again what the link is for the reports that come to that. So as Matt said, and I've referred to that in Chair's reports, that link for people. However, I did notice we got I think it was yellow code for reporting back to council, so it wasn't perfect. So perhaps we do need to talk about that. However, at the last meeting, we got the third quarter report, and it has a whole lot of metrics around delivery. So I would encourage everyone to go in and have a look at that if they're interested in that type of information. And yeah, if you've got any questions, concerns, it is quite a complex area, and as a joint group involving a whole lot of councils, understanding what our particular responsibility is and just feeling safe and secure that everything's happening. We do try to do that through that committee, but I fully understand the questions, the good questions, and do come to me or to Matt if you've got any questions. I am wondering whether or not, Gavin, there's something there around reporting that we need to improve on. I don't know what that is. And also whether or not this council actually wants to be more informed in this space too. And we can probably make that happen too if we need to. Probably workshop just to understand what the space is a bit, and perhaps might be the best way to do that.
I actually wonder whether there's an opportunity for an independent audit from time to time.
Touched on that.
Yeah, an independent audit, just like we do our accounts, for goodness sake, this is more important than our accounts. And every year we get an audit, but from a community to say, well, actually they're investing X amount of money and the outcomes and these staff are actually involved in doing different things. And if it happens tomorrow, we're actually confident. We'll give them a rating. We'll give them an A- rating. And as the governor, I'd say, sounds good. Whereas what I've actually got to do is jump onto their website and come up with my own personal interpretation.
So I wonder, Richard, we might let you think about
we
whether
heard from
we go,
Matt's
whether
just
we
been
go
a couple of days with the national office looking at. It sounds like how there can be a nationally consistent overview of civil defence responsibilities, because it's that, and I think that's probably going to give us a pretty good steer as to whether there's some opportunities for us to do that and then do it consistently with other CDM functions around the country. If there's a desire through audit and risk to have a look at this, we've got to prioritise some of our internal audit functions because there's a lot of things we could look at in this space. Then we can, but I think maybe once Matt's had the chance to digest what's come out of the last 2 days, I can have a discussion with him and Gavin, and we can think about where there might be some opportunities for that in the future. I agree. I don't disagree at all, Brian. I think this is given what we've seen recently in the North Island, it's incredibly important that we have confidence that those structures are there for the community. I'm just also conscious that if we go through that exercise, we're adding some value. So we've got to think about how we do it.
Yes, thank you. And just to add, there's a distinction between auditing effectiveness of group and auditing effectiveness of ORC's component. And you've really got to understand the whole and the components.
Yeah.
And as Matt has said, I've been part of discussions too with NEMA around assurance frameworks. You know, and ideally we would lean on an assurance framework so we could benchmark ourselves about how that doesn't exist nationally.
Yeah, wow, cheapers.
But we'll follow up in terms of what could be done that would be of use.
And we also understand there's another review post Cyclone Gabriel into NEMA's functions and the setup and things that are learned out of that. I know Matt's well connected to all that work too. So we'll continue to learn from these events as they happen and then they're reviewed.
Cool, thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Malcolm.
I'm actually happy with the group review. And I think that's probably the way we need the group review. The part that makes me with my the ORC's part in this whole process is that I've got no real understanding, and perhaps I should be reading somewhere else. I've got no really understanding when a major event hits the Waitaki district, what responsibilities I have as a councillor, what ORC's responsibility is, and because I'm sure Councillor Scott's analogy will be right, that we'll get a pat on the back if it goes good, that they'll be my phone goes now when we have as soon as the water starts rising. So I'd really like to know how the Waitaki part, and I think it'd be quite good for every council, possibly if they're interested, to know how their part of Otago operates when something does happen, and that's. With that knowledge, I'm happy with the group report. I just think that's as good as gold. But I'm more interested in my responsibilities and where the buck stops with me when the event happens in my district, in my constituency.
So we covered off roles and responsibilities of organisation at the current state briefings. But perhaps we could do a follow-up workshop, which is more targeted around that, exactly that. In a flood, what am I expected to do, and how does that kind of work? We could do that.
Then we find some space and
calendars,
we can put this one on us, but it's a good question. So I think that Matt and team could run a very good session looking at a few examples of if this happened, then. And also the relationship with the TLA colleagues and their elected members, because there's two functions operating, so better be clear. So we're not tripping over each other.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Forbes.
Sorry, could I just add to that? Sorry, and look, I'd actually be happy to do that on an individual basis if you didn't think a workshop was the absolute necessary way to do it. So either with Matt or whatever. So I mean, you work out which way you think would be best to.
Yeah, we'll go away and have a think about how to do it.
Lovely. Thanks, Alan. Thank you.
Thanks, Alexa.
Just following on from that, I know there's a lot of community plans now being put together by CDM, and I know that communities are grateful for that. But I don't have a sense of which communities have those plans and which don't, and that could really be part of that, because where a community has a good plan, all those links and relationships are in place. And I know that I'm on a couple of those where I will be informed reasonably quickly when things go wrong, but there's certainly others that other communities that don't have them. It'd be quite nice to have oversight of that.
It certainly sounds from the discussion that there is a wish for greater clarity again.
Yeah, just a focus session on response.
Look, if I can, then through the chair, in relation to the community response group stock take, we have a paper that is going to the coordinating executive group on 1 September. So that will filter its way through to joint committee 2 or 3 weeks later, and we're happy to supply that so you can have some visibility of where things are at. But we're currently working on that at present.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions from councillors? I don't see anyone. So we have one recommendation, which is that we note the report. Anyone prepared to move that? Thank you, Councillor Malcolm, seconded Councillor Forbes. Any discussion?
I'll just make a couple of comments.
Yes.
In relation to Kevin's point, and I'm not being facetious here, the best thing that can happen is have an event, a natural disaster, and then you'll quickly learn what your role is. Because if you look around the district, and I could give, and I'm sure Kate will back me up here, but I can give some examples. The smaller the community, the more remote the community, the more resilient the community is. And Aramoana is a classic example. The last thing they want is help from Centre City, they or wherever. They're happy to keep in touch and say what's going on, but they look after themselves. You know, they've got their own old fire, God, I can't think of the word, the old fire pumps, whatever, that used to be used for the local fire brigade, that sort of thing. It just all kicks in, and it's amazing how everybody just comes together. And I know when I was a DCC councillor based out of Waikawati, there were things that I would just go and do. The chair would go and do, the community board chair would go and do certain things, open up the hall. Some local cooks would come along and, you know, have soup boiling away on the stove or whatever for people on the highway that couldn't head through to town. That sort of thing. It's amazing how it just happens when an event is, when you're confronted with an event. I realise there needs to be coordination with the hierarchy. That's got to happen, but your role will become quite clear. A couple of phone calls, people will tell you what to do.
Can I just add something? Because I don't disagree with them, but there will be an event, and we will get one where that community resilience gets us so far, and we must be well coordinated and have good plans to then come in and provide the support that a community can't realistically provide themselves. Because I agree. I mean, obviously we've been through that in previous events and all around the Dunedin City area, but it is so important we are ready for something bigger than what the community can handle. I agree with everything you said. I think I just want to emphasise that even with that, we have a role to be ready for something slightly bigger.
Yeah, I made it too simple. Fair enough. Vehicle.
Isn't it a 70% chance it's going to be what level earthquake in Queenstown? In the next 4 years.
That's all right.
So it's going to happen. Are we ready?
It is going to happen. Sorry, we don't know. Very good. Look, any further discussion? We're ready to put that motion, recommendation. So we put the recommendation, we note the report, all in favour?
Aye.
All done. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Matt and Gavin, for that last report. And it looks as though we are at the end of the agenda. So ready to call it a day. I'll just close off those meetings with our closing karakia. Kua mutu a matamahi mo tēnei wā. Mana kitia mai mātou katoa o mātou poa o mātou whānau aio ki te aurei. Work's finished for the moment. Bless us, our colleagues and families. Peace for the university. Travel well, everyone. See you again.
Thanks, Gary. Thanks, Michael.
That's what
Thank you.
That's what we
Thank you.
do.
See you later.
Travel well.